together, and then Emory's going to talk about, okay, now I've selected some elements I want to put together to make a spindle for a bed post or a table leg or a chair spreader. All right, now that I've got that design, how do I make multiple versions of that so they all look alike? So what I've got up here is a collection of pieces, not everything, but pieces that are elements that are used in spindle turning. So you know, you've got standard ones like a sphere and a scotia for all of those that study Latin. We've got things like fillets, okay, little flat spots, pineapples, okay. I call these tapered pieces vases and stuff like that. And then we've got a number of transitions, or I call these diamonds, but different elements. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that work together and don't. And so let me talk about, as we start with a table leg. And one of the big things about a table leg, of course, is you're going from square stock up top, and you have to leave it square for the aprons, the table aprons that come out of. And then you got to transform to a rounded thing. So how do you do that? Well, on the very first table I built, and because I didn't know anything and I hadn't hardly used a lathe before, I've got just gradual tapers which go from square to kind of then octagonal kind of, and it looks really ugly. You know, it was for a little table for my son to eat off of. I learned over time that what there is really, that transition is called pommel. And you can have a pommel that's like this, where you take the square and you round it over to the diameter you're going to have. And this is pretty reasonable in terms of design. You can take a part of a leg like this, and it works pretty well because you've got a curve coming down and you've got a curve coming back out. And that's not really so complicated a thing, and it looks pretty good. But you can do some other things. You could, if you want, you could put a fillet in there, but I don't like that. Now, because the fillet coming in here has broken those two curves coming together. And those two curves coming together, I think, was a much nicer design. You can go and do it some kind of transition. And that kind of works too, if you imagine this as a curve into a curve and coming back out. But when you're doing something like this, when you're going from square to a curve to another curve like this, you really don't want to break up the flow of the curve, all right? You want to make that so that the curves flow together and aren't interrupted by something like a flat. And that would be the same thing if I'd put on the scotia like this. I can bring that in. That transition isn't too bad. It goes into a small fillet and then comes down. But then this is awful because now I got a gap here. So maybe I do something like bring that up and do that. But now it's getting pretty frou-frou-y, don't you think?
Yeah.
All right. When you have something as simple, for a lot of these things, is something as simple as this that works, okay? Now you can come down and you can add the bottom of your leg. This goes in there, okay? And that works all right. And but you also have opportunities to do something like break up that flow, all right? So here I come down. I've got a nice transition up here. I come down and I put now a decorative element in this, and then I come down to the bottom of the table leg, or you know, you can put something like that at the bottom or whatever to make it a little bit, bring it up to height and have it flare out a little bit. But one thing I'll say is that generally, let me switch over to a longer piece of wood here. One thing about a table leg, that's still not long enough. I'll use this one. One thing about a table leg that you want to think about, you don't want to make the bottom of it square across necessarily. The issue about having a square across bottom of a table leg is the fact that it'll tend to chip out if that table moves around, okay? That corner, just think about it like that. What's that?
I'll talk about that.
Okay, fine. And so then you got a leg like this, well then you can put something like a round piece at the bottom, and that can make yourself a table leg. All right, you have something where you won't break out across the bottom. All right, so it's just talking about elements that work together or maybe don't work together. Now, when you get to something like a chair spreader, that's a little different deal. Oh, let me finish up on this on a table leg. Now, this is where that was a nice curved pommel. Okay, this is a nice curved pommel. Sometimes another transition is to just make a cut straight across, all right? And that cut straight across, though, if you bring a piece in like this, that doesn't look nearly as nice as the other one did. That curve going to curve works out. This doesn't work so well. So now you need to maybe bring something else, another element into this. So maybe now you can do a transition that goes from that to round, or something like that. Because now you've gone from that square, where in this one I've had a curve that I've added like this. Here I have a square cutoff, but now I've done another transition that's rounded, going into another round and coming down to that taper. Okay? So, got to think about this when you build it. That's one issue. When you design it, you can design it however you want. I prefer this kind of pommel, but as Emory will talk about, he just had a customer say, I want this kind of pommel. So now you've got to figure out something that works for that as well. All right. One of the other things then is often you're talking about building chairs, leg spreaders, these things. Okay, and as you get to, you can do something like this, but it's kind of calling out for something. This doesn't really work as well for a chair spreader. You really need an element in the center. So I can say, okay, let me put in a little piece like that. Well, that's okay in terms of breaking it up, again, curve to curve to curve back out, except that the size of that element in there, in my mind, is too small. Okay? I would tend to say that I want a feature in here, all right? So in that case, I might say instead of doing something this size, I want something this size. So now those elements are more balanced, okay? The diameter of this centerpiece is slightly larger than these diameters, and it kind of makes that flow from the center out to the two legs, okay? Rather than have it kind of stop in the center, and also have a weaker spot in the center because you don't want it weak, all right? Because if you think about what you do with a chair leg, you're often propping your foot on it and everything else, so you want a strong enough piece in there, okay? And I'll just go through one more little thing here, because you can add a lot more stuff to this. I mean, you could, at the end of something like this, again, you can get to all the kind of frou-frou that you'd like. You know, you can put an end like this on it, okay, before it goes in. But you don't want to make, this is going to be complicated because as you have the chair leg here, all right, it's going to have to necessarily have a narrow tenon to go into that chair leg. This isn't going to really work too well. You kind of want to taper it down right to that diameter of the chair leg tenon, the hole that you're putting in the leg and the tenon is for, okay? But you could do something like this. These will go. you know, that may be a place where a fillet works out. You're breaking that curve by putting a fillet, but because of that fillet being a smaller diameter, it's not so disruptive. I would tend to say on this, I'd still prefer the curve into the curve, okay, for a chair spreader. And then for something like a bedpost, where you can have, we'll use this again in this direction, I can go up and I can say, okay, I want to put a pineapple at the top, and that kind of works. You've seen a lot of bedposts that kind of look like this. But on the other hand, you can also bring some other elements that'll kind of break that up. So something like that works reasonably well too. Now I built in a fillet here, okay? So that fillet goes, kind of continues this, but I would probably rather that fillet not be there and that curve sitting right on top of this bead, all right? But there's all kinds of things you can do. You can add other elements that make it more decorative. Where now this may be something you want to do for a bigger kind of poster bed, where that is more dominant. You may want to think about adding even a little bit more fanciness if this was a bigger kind of bedpost than a normal one that's this tall. If it was big, you might want to add something else to it like this. All I'm saying with a lot of these things is that there are a lot of elements. You want a really good balance amongst them, and you don't want one element to overdo the other one. You want these to kind of work together. So maybe this element is too big for that. This becomes a little bit more in scale, or you get rid of this and you say, you know what, something like that works a little bit better. All right. But the point I'm trying to make is that you have all of these different elements to work with. You should think about this design before you really start, okay? Think about what elements work together. And just like Bob was talking about today, when you have it on the lathe like this, it looks different than when you have it set up. And so take the time to do a little drawing, or take the time to do a prototype like this, elements like this, and put them together. You know, this is two 2x4s glued together. It's not a very expensive way to do a prototype for your design. But let's say now that it's not your prototype. The person has a design that they want to build into a table or into a bed or whatever, and gives you the design either as a drawing or a prototype, or something that the two of you work out together. But now you have that design to work from, and the question is, now that I've got all these elements, what the heck am I going to do to reproduce them? And so Emory's going to show you now how to go from the design to making more than one of the same thing.
I gotta say, Ed did a really good job with that. When I heard that he was going to talk 20 minutes on design, I was thinking, oh my God, what is he going to do? And how? And this was inspired. I really like that.
Cool.
So he put a lot of thought in that.